Welcome to my channel where we question everything. Today's topic is military affairs, and the heading is why there will be no nuclear Armageddon, the Russian Doomsday Machine. It seems to me everybody is forgetting or not aware of the Russian so-called Doomsday Machine. The term Doomsday Machine was actually coined in the 1964 movie, while it was a black comedy. It was called Dr. Strangelove, and which can be considered as a classic on nuclear madness if you want to see it. Well, the system, there is such a system, and the Russians possess it, and it's called the dead hand, or more precisely, the perimeter. In short, it's actually a system which is activated when NATO succeeds in taking out key decision makers during a nuclear strike in Russia. And what it means is that, well, we all know that in America, the US president is supposed to have a football type of suitcases following everywhere, and this allows him to press a button and launch a nuclear strike. But unfortunately, that's a fallacy. That suitcase has no button, but it allows the president to give enter the authorization codes into the system, and then somebody else will press the button. But in any case, the Russians have something similar, and it's all sort of automated. And if the Americans or NATO would have done a strike on Ukraine, first strike or type of thing, and destroyed the Russian president or the command center that will activate the nuclear weapons, then this dead hand system called the perimeter will launch or will activate all the remaining nuclear armaments in Russia. And basically, the system was designed to ensure the mad doctrine, and it ensured that America and NATO can never launch and win a first strike nuclear attack by eliminating the critical command centers. And by doing this, the mad principle is ensured. Now, I'm sure that the Americans at this stage know about it, but we will get to that. Well, why did the Russians develop the system? And it actually, well, there were two events that led to the creation of this system. First, there was a decree that was issued by President Jimmy Carter and signed by him. And then in 1984, you can't believe it. But in any case, I've never heard of the guy. Konstantin Chernenko, a 72-year-old sick with end-stage emphysema, became the leader of the Soviet Union. Never heard about the guy. But in any case, he was a sick old man. Well, he was followed up by Mikhail Gorbachev, who actually wrote in one of his books, and I quote, "The leader of a great power turned out to be not just a physically weak, but a seriously ill person. Actually, a disabled person." That's what Mikhail Gorbachev wrote about the man. In any case, going back to the American side, in 1980, by the height of the Cold War, tensions to the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, the Jimmy Carter signed the notorious Directive 59, which is called the Nuclear Weapons Employment Policy, which was aimed at giving US leaders more flexibility in planning for and executing a nuclear war. The document presupposed the use of advanced technology to detect Soviet nuclear facilities, including in Eastern Europe and North Korea. And the Americans planned to carry out precision strikes on these sites, and having received data on the damage, they would either launch another strike on that same facility or bomb somebody else. And what it actually meant is that the Americans would identify the silos beforehand and therefore target these systems. and hopefully they could eliminate them. But as always, one has to consider that you miss some and that you have to look for them. Well, basically, the authors of the Directive 59, among who was a presidential military advisor, William Odom, believed that the use of nuclear weapons against regular units of the Soviet army will not lead to nuclear apocalypse. And that basically it will take days and weeks to find all the targets worthy of a precision nuclear strike. Now, as you can see that in 1980, the Americans were already considering nuclear first strike. While at this stage, as far as I understand, is the Americans had more nuclear weapons, missiles, than the Russians. And the Russians also knew that if the Russians can never do a first strike because the Americans will have enough surviving forces, if you want to call it, and then they can launch a counterattack Russia, and then Russia will retaliate, be annihilated. And at that time also, in 1983, the US delivered the Pershing II nuclear missiles to West Germany, and there were big demonstrations and so on, and a lot of problems until finally the Americans removed those Pershings II from Germany. Well, the stationing of these missiles created a new threat, and it increased the possibility of nuclear weapons because they could reach the Soviet Union in a matter of minutes. The same problem we have at this stage with Ukraine, and why the Russians are really in Ukraine and fighting the war in order to prevent a similar status situation when Ukraine becomes part of NATO and America establishes certain missile systems in Ukraine, and then flight time is only a couple of minutes. But in any case, the question then had to be asked, so what if this Chernenko, and I would like to quote again because the description is just good, a bent figure, trembling hands, a breaking voice, calling for discipline and selfless work, sheets of paper falling from his hands, had to, end quote, had to make a decision on the nuclear counterattack. This was also written by Gorbachev. Well, again, the question is, what would have happened if the whole leadership was dead before they even had a chance to order a retaliatory strike? Something basically, well, the Americans don't have. So if Biden is taken out, but I believe they have different systems, is that they have the vice president somewhere else located or something like that. But so if Biden is taken out, at least it's a follow-up leader that can take this decision. Well, if the leadership is taken out, who would basically contact the remote command posts on the submarines, and who will give them the necessary instruction to retaliate? And these were all valid questions. So if a country was beheaded, then the country was denied a chance to respond. A vulnerability leaving no space for reacting, and therefore the Soviet Union considered various options. The principle of, if I am going down, I'm taking everybody with me approach was sort of a way of proving that they could not and should not be winners in any future nuclear wars. Basically what they tried to do is that the argument was supposed to make war so meaningless that it will be impossible to do. And these factors, or these arguments, then led to the creation of the Perimeter Project. And now we can look at what the Perimeter Project was. Well, in 1984, a guy called Valery Yarenich, a colonel in the elite strategic missile forces, was appointed as the deputy head of the main directorate of missile weapons. Well, he's the kingpin where everything turned around. And he was entrusted with perfecting a fraud system, and it should have been partially automated, and that it should launch intercontinental ballistic missiles in a retaliatory strike if certain conditions were met or if certain conditions occurred. Meaning, if the Soviet Union's leadership was taken out with the first strike, basically being decapitated, and therefore unable to retaliate. And as the argument go, that required a system like, well, sometimes we call it a dead man's handle, or a dead hand, or I don't know, the dead hand word. But in any case, you know what I mean, the Doomsday Machine. Well, as I've stated, even the amount of nuclear weapons both countries had, the Soviet Union always understood that they could never launch a first strike and hope to survive. Because there's always a dangerous to launch missiles after detecting American warheads heading towards Soviet Union. Because at that time there have already been several false alarms and false warnings, which could have initialized the nuclear exchange, but luckily it didn't. So consider ourselves being very lucky. So the only option that really left was to only initialize a strike after confirming that there is a proper attack by the enemy. And this was also dependent on the state of the mind of the General Secretary. And as we have known, that at that stage it was the Konstantin Chernenko, which has a little bit of health problems, feeble. So typically a leader like that, then they had to make provision, and they didn't need to be Chernenko. It could have been a different leader who, hey, like today's Joe Biden. He could have been frightened, he could have been confused, could have been too slow to act, or he could have believed it's another false alarm. Typically what you can expect from Joe Biden. And what the developers of this perimeter system try to do is to minimize human intervention. But it was 1984, and technology was still a bit limited. So basically the system worked on that the only thing that the General Secretary had to do was to send a necessary command or codes to the system, and thereby the system would have been armed and ready to go, and then it will start monitoring certain events. And after that directive has been obtained by the machine or system, if you want to call it, then there was still, then the fate of humankind basically went to a couple of officers who had to make sort of a decision, but they were very isolated in special bunkers that were deep underground, and that even not a nuclear strike would destroy them. So basically, at the end of the day, the final decision was made by a small number of officers, deep underground, totally isolated. But as necessary, these officers had a list of 3 criteria which had to be fulfilled before they could launch an attack. Firstly, naturally, the status of the perimeter system. That means, has it been activated by the General Staff, and has the Kremlin put it on alert? That's condition number 1. Call it a green button or a green light. Then they would have tested communications with commanders and party leaders, and if there was no communication possible, they would have assumed that those people have been eliminated. And then they had to confirm whether there was a nuclear strike, and that was They could have measured it by special sensors distributed over Russia that sort of measured the level of radiation and illumination, recorded seismic shocks, and maybe an increase in atmospheric pressure. So if all these systems or all these criteria were then fulfilled, then this few officers then had no choice and had to come to the conclusion that the leadership was dead and that the nuclear strike has indeed taken place, and then these officers were authorized to launch and command the missiles. And then within 30 minutes, they would have given the order and they would have launched the remaining ballistic missiles that were still intact. And actually, who was the target? The target was the US, along with major NATO capitals like Paris, Berlin, London, and etc. But also this system was not only for like a dead man's handle, like a doomsday machine. We have heard that there were a couple of mishaps, faults in sensors, and luckily they were sorted out. But this machine then also prevented a nuclear response based on unverified information and basically faulty sensors. So it has also a significant benefit. Basically, if the system, like I said, the operation would be, is that when the officials sort of received this, a signal basically that an attack has started, the officers then would activate the perimeter system, and then they would wait for the three conditions or the rest, the other two conditions basically to be fulfilled. If it doesn't happen, then it was probably a false signal, and they would basically not launch the retaliation. Well, apparently the question still remains whether the developers of the perimeter system went further and made the system completely autonomous and turning it into a true doomsday machine. It's like I said, in 1984, technology wasn't that much advanced, but now it has, and we have enough computers and so on to make it autonomous, yeah. So, well, did the Russians elect to do it and hand over their fate to a machine, or do they still require human intervention? The only problem with this is that the system was kept secret. And that is the problem of this movie, Dr. Strangelove, is that why have a doomsday machine which is supposed to destroy the enemy in a retaliatory action, and why make it secret and not show it to your enemy so that he knows that should he attack and do a first strike, he will be annihilated as well. So surely this information should have been conveyed to the Americans, but apparently was never. But then the designer of the system made it his life mission, if you want to call it, to tell the Western world. And so the world can know it, not to attack Russia or the Soviet Union. And in 2007, this Yarein Nish gave a detailed interview to the Wired magazine. And then he confirmed the existence of the perimeter system, and it is still highly classified and secret. And he always argued that the other party must be informed of the existence and operational parameters. And in this interview, he repeated the story about the technical features of the perimeter. And most importantly, he confirmed that the system is constantly being updated and upgraded. Well, then again, according to, I gotta read this name, Piotr Kozulski, a former researcher at the Research Center for Applied Informatics, also confirmed that the perimeter system has been updated and that the new control center is equipped with a neural network. See, they made it like intelligent. Well, I don't know, but what's that thing about Terminator? What's Skylink. So hopefully the Russians didn't create a form of Skylink, if I may remember it correctly. But there's no confirmation about this. And there are very few sources, or actually there are no other sources that would talk about it. So it's still type of a rumor, but it's like a rumor for us, but probably a confirmed system for the intelligence service, the CIA and Europe and NATO intelligence. And it will probably stay this way, and all the information about the system and its analog system will be classified. And then there's also a US Air Force nuclear launch officer, Dr. Bruce Blair, that has also repeatedly claimed that the system is constantly being upgraded. And in 2018, he spoke to the Daily Star, and he said that the system is currently being operated by only 3 crew members, whose only job is to ensure the system is functional. And he also said that the daytime system is fully automatic, except it has to be turned on by the general staff during a crisis, and there's a small crew that would perform a small number of functions before it will operate. Basically, and I quote, the crew is not high-ranking and would just follow a checklist, and so that human components would not exercise judgment and only react like a Pavlovian dogs. So these guys are not capable of making complicated decisions and just either are highly patriotic or whatever you want to, or doctrinated, but they will turn the button or the key and there it goes. But it's not their system. So it doesn't sound too bad because it does have intelligence, but intelligence probably to verify whether a nuclear strike has taken place. So it's not a machine that does its own thinking. It has to be basically activated. You can basically say it had to be powered up. But in any case, Burns said also that it's a legitimate and ethical way to prevent a nuclear war on the foundation of deterrence based second strike retaliation. And it has also been switched on, apparently in 2009, and it is ready to strike now. And then somebody else in December 2011, the commander of strategic missile forces, a Lieutenant General Sergei Karakev, stated at the time and confirmed basically that yes, the perimeter system exists today and she's on combat duty, which means she's activated. And if you also remember that at the beginning of the Russian SMO, Putin stated and put the nuclear forces of Russia on high alert in order to prevent any intentions by NATO or America to launch the first strike, first nuclear strike. Yeah, in any case, you know what I mean. And I'm sure that Putin made sure that that perimeter system is active and hard to go. But unfortunately, we will never know for sure. And as I've stated, I believe NATO and America does know, and does know what its function is. But one never knows, given the rhetoric that was coming from the West in the last couple of weeks. You never know with idiots and psychopaths. But as you can see, if the West knows about it, and the Russians have such a system, and it is put on high alert, and it is activated, then surely no person in his right mind will start a nuclear war. Even a tactical battlefield type of war. Because those things will escalate very quickly, because nobody can afford. But where do you stop? What criteria does any of the two sides have in deciding no, a tactical nuclear strike is not that severe? Yes, we can live there with that. Like typical, I referred last time to when Turkey shot down the Russian fighter jet. And Russia could have escalated, but they didn't do it. But that was Putin's patience. But with a nuclear strike, it can be totally something different. Well, that's a little bit food for thought. Like I said, I'm a firm believer there will be no nuclear war or exchange of any kind between America and Russia. Not in the foreseeable near future. Because both parties know what's at stake. And the principle of MAD is still active and valid. In any case, that's my story for today. If you like what you heard, press the like button, subscribe to the channel, spread the word, share it with your friends, and until next time, cheers.